Good morning, everybody. This is Steve from Adisa. I think we're live. So you can see all of our happy faces on this Thursday morning. I'm joined today by Bev Benham from Tier 1, Andy Hanratty from Mint, and Justin Greenaway from Sweep. And today's subject matter is zero landfill. We've only got 15 minutes, so I'm going to shut up. So Bev, as first receiver, talk me through, what does ITAD mean when it talks about zero landfill?
I think it's a really valid thing to aim for, that we should all be aiming for 0% landfill. However, is that really achievable? I'm not absolutely 100% sure. We talk about 0% landfill, but via processes, etc., we end up with some form of waste, which may just be process waste. And from my point of view, we should be looking at the waste hierarchy, which basically states reuse before recycling. And moreover, that then promotes having a circular economy. So not just reuse of the whole devices, which definitely we should be doing first of all, but secondly, looking at your downstream processing, looking at dismantling, looking where you can reuse components, and further on downstream, looking at how your recyclers manage the process to recover precious metals. And I think the recovery of those metals over the next 5 years will become more and more important, and we will see corporates asking us as they become scarcer and scarcer. We've seen recently, the chipset debacle, more and more call on precious metals such as gold, palladium, etc., is what are we doing and what sort of recovery rates we're getting. I mean, Justin, are you already seeing people asking you for those types of figures?
Yeah, very much so, Bev. We are engaged in trying to put, obviously, raw materials back round again, and there is definitely an appetite from manufacturers to understand availability of CRM and that kind of concept of getting things going back round. But just thinking about what we were talking about with the landfill concept, and probably what a lot of people don't really realise is when you even send stuff to waste to energy, there's always a bit of that waste to energy that never burns.
Yeah.
It's about 40% of before what goes into an incinerator comes out as a solid.
Yeah.
And then amazingly, about 10% of that 40% can't even be recycled for aggregates because it's so kind of light and dusty, it would just kind of wash away. So broadly speaking, you burn 100 tons, you'll have 4 tons going for landfill. So almost like when you say zero to landfill, what you're actually saying is, I haven't personally put anything to landfill, but my next guy has. And that's a little bit short-termist.
It's true. You do have to go up and downstream slightly, with regards to this, just to make sure that your virtuous actions aren't someone else's, I won't say environmental crimes further downstream, but, you have a position to take with regards to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as long as you do your due diligence on those downstream recyclers, to make sure that, they're not landfilling whole units, then having that 0% landfill policy really applies to whole units, whole components, and not the sludge, or as a very dear ex-colleague of mine used to call it, that comes out of the demanufacturing process.
Funny enough, we did get approached actually on incinerator fly ash from waste to energy plants to look at putting our tech in there in order to strip out whatever remaining precious metals, because it does actually concentrate up certain materials which are present in waste. Just to have a look at, to see if we could have that final sort of pull out of material, reduce it 1 or 2%. that eventually goes for landfill. And even that some of that fly ash can have a secondary use in a form of sort of a cinder block material, or it's used as, funny enough, it has a function on the landfill site as a temporary cover, or sometimes constructing temporary roadways, which is there. So everything's ultimately, hopefully, got a use that passes through our hands.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd be really interested to hear from the market as a whole as to what they think. Do they use that term when talking to their customers? Is, look, we guarantee 0% landfill, or are we talking now? Should we be talking about standards for 0% landfill policy? Environmentally, we will look at ISO 14001 as being the standard. We look at the WEEE directive as being the standard. And let's face it, the WEEE directive is pretty easy to meet unless you're a complete idiot. But the 0% landfill policy is laudable, but the guarantee of 0% landfill, I think we agree, is almost unachievable.
I would say it's absolutely impossible. Even if
it is, I mean, we need a far more sort of joint
like
thinking. Manufacturers to recyclers, waste management companies. It would have to be all the way down the value chain and up the value chain as well to product design to make things more recyclable, less co-bonded materials, etc. Which
precisely. So the onus going back. I mean, we then talk about well, there's two things. I mean, there's the likes of bonded units, inbuilt obsolescence with a lot of product that we're seeing coming out of manufacturers that are literally sealed units that you can't reuse or repair if they're broken. So the whole thing has to be dismantled and go for recycling. But also, what do you think, Andrew, about, and I'd be interested to hear about some of the biodegradable process, such as bioleaching? Where does that leave? Does that help solve that problem?
In effect, it doesn't. I think, all we are is a, bioleaching, biofixing, bioabsorption. As technologies, we're slightly disruptive with regards to the incumbent technology, which has been conventional smelting, which, was carried out, first of all, about 6,500 years ago and has changed a little bit, but the overall emphasis is it's a very similar process, which carries on today. So what we're trying to do with these novel technologies is perform the same function to the same efficiency, and occasionally even more flexible with regards to what we can pull out, but do it in a more in a less energy intensive way. So consequently, generate less carbon as a process. And I think, these processes these various biotechnologies we're trying to roll out, the more democratizing almost, in as much as they don't have to be built on an almost continental scale operation. They can be almost, I won't say city deployed, but they can be deployed very readily due to the comparatively discrete footprints that they require. Mm. And there's no, we don't have to be near a waterfall providing abundant, limitless energy for us to consume willy-nilly. We're fairly, we've been crafted as operations to be, very, very sparing in our usage, etc.
Which, again, leads to maybe another discussion that both of you as experts in the recycling industry is where's the payoff from having a small amount of landfill to industrializing your processes more to make that 0% landfill. But then you're increasing your carbon footprint by using more water, by using more heat, by using more carbon processes. I mean, Justin, what are your thoughts?
I guess what's kind of on my mind is just the risk of us being accused of kind of greenwashing as an industry if some of us are saying we're zero to landfill with no ability to actually evidence that. And I think we conclude it's unevidenceable.
Right.
So I'm not sure if data has a role to play here or not, but if I make a claim, I'd want to be able to validate it and be quite clear about how I'm validating that independently.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah, I think there's an element you can get to on your own, but you'll fairly quickly butt up against a glass ceiling because there'll be factors there which you simply don't have control over. And we go back to the product design sort of stage then. I mean, when the iPad and the Microsoft Surface came out, we thought they were horribly unrecyclable as items. But I think there was a Dell unit, the XPS, which wasn't just recyclable, but they even labeled some of the cables inside for us. It was almost an invitation, So, certainly, depending on the material that's flowing through your site, you could find that, you will hit a glass ceiling because of factors you don't have control over. And then, we have to go back to the product design stage in order to get that law of diminishing returns to work in our favor and get some movement on it.
Yeah, but it's a safe thing to conclude that zero to landfill is impossible. And therefore, anybody claiming zero to landfill is only looking at their first step.
And I agree. I mean, I'd be interested to hear from any of the attendees to the webinar today who truly believe that they have a process that is 0% to landfill, which is fantastic. But I agree. I think we should, as ITADs, I think when talking about this with our customer, we talk about, we don't contribute to landfill, but I think we should discuss the process and validate and qualify that to say we do our best to make sure nothing goes to landfill. However, it is a mechanical process. And at the end of the day, there is going to be an output from that mechanical process that will contribute to a small amount of landfill.
And maybe legislatively driven as well.
Agreed, Beth.
Sorry, Andrew, I missed that.
Sorry, Andrew, go on.
Sorry, aren't we legislatively driven as well to divert some material, circuit board bodies to energy to waste plants as well? They can't go for any form of secondary plastic reuse, remelt, etc. at the moment. If we can prove they contain polybrominated diphenyl ethers. So.
And I think we'll see more and more legislation surrounding that. I'm no expert, I'm the ITAD expert. I'm not the environmentalist here. But maybe this is something that ADISA, as part of our overall approvals and certification, I don't know, maybe that's something that we should include moving forward. Sorry to put more onus on you, Steve, and your team.
Well, to give you an idea of kind of our process, directly, we have things going to landfill that we just physically can't avoid. And I'm certain nobody else can either. So the highlights for us are internal coatings from cathode ray tubes, leaded glass from cathode ray tubes, and toner dust, obviously from toner cartridges. So that's us directly putting those into landfill. But then any waste to energy we send, obviously 100 tons into waste to energy, about 4 tons goes to landfill. And then there's an element of our residues as well that frustratingly still need to go to landfill. All very small percentages, but our typical kind of recycling rate, including kind of waste to energy, is high 90s. But you can't possibly say 100%. As I say, I think it ends up greenwashing the industry and devaluing anybody that's actually doing the math.
But when you say, Justin, that as a process, aiming for zero waste to landfill tends to bring its own sort of commensurate benefits just by going on that process of, getting the sleeves rolled up and diving into what you're doing, how you're doing it in order to generate as little, is this actually, should we be more realistic and say we want to generate as little material that goes to landfill as possible? And isn't this really the journey? Setting the bar as high as zero waste ensures that you really tackle all the issues that you have, which could go to landfill.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone should be trying to minimize landfill, of course.
The time's up. ITAD in 15 is 15 minutes, which we may have to revisit because I think there's a lot more to be discussed on this subject matter, but we said 15 minutes, so we're going to stick to 15 minutes. We do have a question from Jane, actually. Does the panel think that the EA has a part to play in encouraging investment in recycling technologies?
Yes. Absolutely. I think I used to work with the EA at one point on their ITAD processes, and they seem to come and go in their interest as to what our ITAD processes are. And I think it's very difficult for them when local officers interpret rules differently. But I certainly think that centrally that there should be more focus and more investment on looking at the amount of not just the computer industry, but the amount of electronic waste and how it's dealt with in this company and how they measure those processes.
So I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I'm just going to summarize if I can, because there's a lot of really, really good points there during the discussion. So zero landfill is impossible due to the current techniques available. We all have a role to play in reducing the likelihood of landfill by product reuse. Bev, as the first receiver, the ITAD sector, if you like, needs to start looking at reuse as a default position.
Absolutely.
Yeah, true.
Longer term, we're looking at all stakeholders in electronics to be involved in the effort to ensure the zero landfill, right from the design stage through to the ability to repair, and then through to making sure that electronics go into a professional industry, as opposed to slipping outside of those controls, such that professional industry can look to minimize and reduce the percentage which goes to landfill. And just in those stats, by the way, thank you so much for that. So even waste to energy, you're talking at a small percentage, but it's still a significant percentage of inevitable landfill.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yeah.
Good.
Residue has its own name, incinerator fly ash. Absolutely.
I'm going to say
I'll be using that, Andrew.
I'm going to say thank you very much to the panel. This is our first one, and Andy's got COVID, so he's been struggling this week. So thank you very much, sir, for sticking through with it. I'm very grateful, and I'm glad that we're remote as well. I'm going to say thank you very much for the panel. The very first one, we'll learn from it. Bev, you did the role as moderator fantastically well. I thought you kept things going brilliantly. I'm going to say thank you very much. I'm going to switch the broadcast off now, and we'll be contacting all those who took part as punters to see their experience, that we can refine our own process and become better moving forward. So I'll say thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. If the panelists can stay on, I'll have a quick chat to you backstage. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.